I'm supposed to believe in God after this 5-minute video. Will I? Will I be convinced that any God is actually real? Let's find out. So, I came across this video with a clickbaity title that guarantees that I will believe in God if I just give them 5 minutes of my time. Sure, why not? But instead of being convinced, this video proved that they really have nothing but empty claims, and they don't even try to convince me that God, or Allah in this case, is real. It's just an assumption in the vein of, when in doubt, Allah did it. Sorry, not impressed. So let's go take a look and see why I just wasted 5 minutes of my life that I'll never get back.
Smile to Jannah.
The moon is 400 times closer to Earth than the sun. And the sun is 400 times larger than the moon. What does this mean?
Absolutely nothing. That's just how things worked out. Now, I'm sure he's going to claim that there's some great theological significance, but that doesn't make it so. So let's see how he tries to spin this coincidence.
It means that when the moon comes in between the sun and the earth, they both seem the same size to us, such that we form a perfect eclipse.
So what? And that's not even the case, because the moon doesn't have a perfect spherical orbit. It's elliptical with an average eccentricity of 0.0549. The Earth also doesn't have a spherical orbit around the sun. It varies by about 3.3% over the course of a year. That means that, depending on when the solar eclipse happens, it may not perfectly block out the sun. But hey, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story or anything.
Now, you might be thinking, yeah, that's standard stuff, mate. It's not standard stuff, because in our solar system, there are approximately 166 moons, and that never happens to any other planet, because either the moon seems too big or the sun seems too big. But why is it that only on Earth? It's so specific. It's as if Allah is trying to tell us something.
Who cares? All he's doing is taking a coincidence and assigning theological significance to it that he can't demonstrate at all. And this is supposed to convince me that his imaginary friend in the sky is real. Can't say I'm at all impressed so far. So, 1 minute is up. Hopefully, he's gonna do better.
Now, as we know, when the universe was created, we had hydrogen and helium. But we need carbon for life to exist.
For our form of life to exist. But our form of life is not the only possible form of life out there. Theoretically, there can be life based on many other elements under many other conditions. So that's already wrong, but I trust no one is surprised.
Hydrogen and helium is all well and good, but to form carbon, you need 3 heliums to come together to form carbon. So there's this scientist called Sir Fred Hoyle. He wanted to see how these 3 heliums come together.
Now, it has to be noted here that Fred Hoyle wasn't religious. He believed in panspermia, the position that life here came from out there. Kind of like Battlestar Galactica, but more primitive. But I'm sure that our Muslim apologist here, he won't acknowledge that, will he?
So, of course, in the lab, they do what they gotta do, but he noticed that nothing really was happening. So then, it occurred to him that maybe these 3 heliums will come together at a specific resonance. In other words, there has to be a specific nuclear ground state energy. So he tried that and it worked. And he noticed that if it was different, for even 1%, the heliums would not come together to form carbon.
Which, again, proves what about Allah? Because so far, all he's saying is, hey, that's interesting, therefore Allah. And logic doesn't work that way.
After discovering this, Hoyle later confessed that nothing has shaken his atheism more than this discovery.
Yet he died an atheist in 2001. And as I said, he never bought into any religion, especially not Islam. He believed that life came from somewhere else, blown in on the cosmic winds. Now, Hoyle could never justify that position, and I think that's something he held emotionally because we have no reason to find anything extraordinary about any of the biological or chemical components that generated life on this planet, so where's this proof for Allah again? I'm not seeing it. 2 minutes up, and no dice yet.
As we know, the sun and the earth is at a reasonable distance. Yeah, if it was too close, we'd all burn. If it was too further away, we'd all freeze.
The earth happens to fall into the Goldilocks zone, which now that we can see lots of planets out there, there are tons of planets that fall into that diameter. Don't tell me you're going to try to credit Allah with this one too.
If this relationship between earth and the sun changed for even 2%, there'd be no life on this planet, guys.
No life that looks like the currently well-known life, but we have extremophiles on the planet right now that live under very different conditions that would probably be just fine. We have life that lives in deep sea thermal vents that do fine up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. We have life that lives in frozen Arctic wastes that survives temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit. There are things that live in extremes of acidity and alkalinity. They can survive ionizing radiation far beyond what we can tolerate, that can thrive at temperatures that would kill us many times over. So sure, if you move the planet, you'd kill off a lot of the species that evolved to survive under these conditions, but you wouldn't necessarily wipe out all life by any means. And let's not even talk about tardigrades that can survive in almost all of these extremes. Our apologist here, as should be no surprise, is just wrong once again.
That's how much is finely tuned.
Except it's not. But this is just another assumption that I see the religious making all the time. That their basis is human life, not all life. We evolved to fit the characteristics of the planet, not the other way around. We were not the goal. Evolution has no goal. We are the current end result of natural selection based on the ecological niche that we inhabit. And again, no reason to insert Allah into any of this, even if any of these assertions were valid. 3 minutes down, still not at all impressed. He has to do much, much, much better than this.
As we know, everything is made from atoms, but there's two forces that are holding atoms together. You've got the electromagnetic force, which holds the structure of the atom, and then you've got the nuclear strong force, which holds the nucleus of the atom. These two have to be at a specific ratio for life to exist.
Not for life to exist, but for anything to exist. And since things do exist, apparently they are at the right ratio. This is yet another bald assertion that we were intended, therefore everything had to be just right for us to be here. But that's looking at things entirely backwards. It's like the puddle thinking that the hole it inhabits is perfectly formed for it, not recognizing that it conforms to the hole that it finds itself in. Life isn't the goal. Life is a byproduct. If things had been different, we wouldn't have been here to talk about it. We're here because the conditions where we evolved happened to produce our type of life. If they had happened to support another kind of life, perhaps life based on silicon or ammonia or methane or something else, all of which are theoretically possible, then we'd probably be sitting here saying how wonderful it is that the universe was finely tuned for just our form of life.
Now what's this ratio? Let me tell you, it's 1/10⁻16. 10 to the power 16 is 10, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 16 times.
Big deal. And again, where exactly does Allah demonstrably fit into any of this? Oh, wait, he doesn't. But our apologist here has a backwards understanding of things that he uses Allah as a catch-all to explain anything he doesn't get. But here's the thing. The chances of those two variables being any value at all, is 1 over 10 to the 16th power. He doesn't get how mathematics works.
Now that is very, very specific.
No, it's not. It's just a complete misunderstanding of how numbers work. But when you're talking about someone with an imaginary friend who desperately wants to convince others that he's right, I guess it can't be all that surprising.
Now, if this fine-tuning wasn't there, there'd be no stars. If there's no stars, there'd be no planets. If there's no planets, there would be no life.
And that's true. Yep, here we are. So clearly, there is a combination that worked, and things happened as they did, and we evolved to ask these questions. And once again, where is the proof of Allah in any of this? None of his claims have even addressed Allah. Oh, I know he'll just assume that Allah was there without evidence because he wants Allah to be responsible. But that's not how this works. Stop failing.
At the dawn of the Big Bang, there was something called dark energy which is pushing our universe out there. Now this is so finely tuned that if this force was too much, the universe would have exploded and nothing would have formed. If it was too less, it would have collapsed upon itself, and again, nothing would have formed. Now how much is this force? Well, let me tell you, mate. It's 1 over 10 to the power 120. That is very, very specific.
Same as the last argument, and I'm still not impressed. First off, it did happen because here we are, and if it hadn't happened, nobody would have known. How many universes exploded and didn't form? How many just collapsed and vanished from existence? We'll never know, but the thought that just because ours did, and maybe many, many others did as well, that some magical man in the sky did it, that's just absurd. And of course, as I said in the last argument, every possible end result also has the same chances, 1 over 10 to the 120th power. He says it to make it sound impressive, but it's really not. 4 minutes gone, and yeah, you know.
Astrophysicist Hugh Ross says,
You do know that Hugh Ross is a Christian apologist, right? He doesn't believe in Allah, but you're not going to mention that inconvenient little fact, are you?
that the chance of our planet existing in the universe, it's so rare.
And what did he base that on? When did he do so? Because modern astronomers are finding tons and tons and tons of planets in the Goldilocks zone of their star, and as our technology improves, we're going to find a lot more, because seeing Earth-sized planets at the distances involved is currently incredibly difficult. So yeah, I'd have to look at his calculations.
How rare though? Well, he calculated it was 1 over 10 to the power 30.
Yet, here we are, and we're not looking very rare. Of course, we don't know if life has actually evolved on any other planet, much less technologically advanced life, but the building blocks are there. Liquid water is very likely. An atmosphere is very likely. And maybe someday we'll be able to go and take a look. Who knows? But just because we don't know for certain, that doesn't mean that we ought to just make up emotionally comforting answers.
That's the chance that a planet like ours could form in the universe.
No, it isn't. It's wishful thinking on the part of the delusional. Taking conditions that exist and pretending they prove anything is ridiculous. And here's why. The human genome is about 3 million base pairs. only one very specific set of genetic base pairs will result in you. So your parents had to pass on one and only one exact set of genes to you in order for you to exist. And their parents had to pass on one and only one exact set of genes to your parents so that they could produce you. And so on, and so on, and so on. And keep in mind that every single one of your grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents had to survive to breed, and they had to avoid accidents and diseases that would render them infertile, and they had to find the one and only one other person on the entire planet that they could breed with and pass on that very specific set of genes. And in every case, only one sperm could meet up with one egg, or the whole thing comes crashing down. The chances of this are beyond astronomical. Yet there you are, and there's no designer required.
The fine-tuning argument, guys, it's such a solid proof for the existence of a designer that atheists go to great lengths to disprove these minute probabilities.
No, we just point out that your interpretation of these probabilities is ridiculous, especially when those interpretations are totally unjustifiable. All this stuff happened, therefore Allah is patently absurd. And you're making this video called "After This You Will Believe in God," and then you don't do anything to prove that a God, any God, especially not your God, is real, and you expect us not to laugh at you. Sorry to disappoint you.
In fact, the best thing they've come up with is the multiverse theory, which what they've said is there's an infinite amount of universes out there, so the chance of a universe or a solar system or a planet like ours forming is actually probable.
Which works mathematically. Now, granted, we don't know for sure and may never know for sure, but the only thing you have is pulling lots of figures out that mean nothing, therefore your imaginary friend. You've got no room to talk.
But guys, there's no proof for the multiverse theory. It's just a hypothesis at this moment in time.
Says the guy with no proof of any kind for his deity. It's not even a hypothesis. It's just an empty claim.
And it's just another creative way to delay the existence of God.
That thing you haven't even tried to prove, you mean? This is just bald hypocrisy. You've had your 5 minutes and I'm not convinced of anything you had to say. Certainly not the existence of your imaginary friend. So your video, as I'm sure no one is surprised, is wrong.
Because it's inevitable. Yeah, if you're a reasonable person, it's inevitable for you to start questioning that there has to be a creator.
And yes, that's just how the video ended. Why do so many religious videos just cut off in the middle of a sentence or just fade out without any definitive end? Bad production values ahoy. But this really is a terrible example of how the religious totally fail to prove their points. They just assume that they're right and expect everyone else to come to the same assumption. And when we don't, when we point out all of the things that the religious are doing wrong, the bad assumptions, the bold assertions, and the lack of any credible evidence, they act like we're the crazy ones. Like we're the ones with an agenda. Like we don't know how to use logic and reason and evidence. And that's why talking to these mental midgets is a complete waste of time most of the time. They don't care about reality, only their emotionally comforting fantasy. We care only about reality and the most rational, evidence-based explanation thereof. These are two tastes that unfortunately never mix well, and the religious can't get it through their heads why we're not impressed with their empty claims, complete lack of evidence, and wishful thinking. I probably ought to do a video sometime explaining that, but they won't listen. They never listen to reason. That's why they believe what they do.